power, survival, transformation. These three words would define one man's journey from the darkest pits of the galaxy to becoming the architect of the Sith's ultimate victory. But before there was Darth Bane, the Sith Army, who would reshape an entire order, there was only Dessel, a boy born into misery on a world forgotten by hope. The year was 1026, before the Battle of Yavin, and on the outer rim mining planet of Apatros. A child entered a world that wanted nothing from him but labor and pain. Apatros was not a planet anyone chose. It was a sentence handed down by poverty, bad luck, or both. Endless fields of cortosis ore stretched beneath a perpetually gray sky, and the people who extracted that precious metal did so at the cost of their bodies, their futures, and often their lives. Dessel's mother died bringing him into this harsh reality. His father, a miner named Hurst, never forgave him for it. From Dessel's earliest memories, he knew only two things with certainty: his father's fists and the crushing weight of blame. Hurst was a broken man, shattered long before his son's birth by years in the mines, and drowned deeper still in cheap alcohol that burned away whatever fragments of humanity remained. To Hurst, the boy was a curse, a reminder of everything he'd lost, and he made sure Dessel knew it. "Bane of my existence," Hurst would snarl, his breath reeking of Corellian whiskey, his knuckles already red. The word was meant as an insult, a condemnation, but it would one day become something else entirely. Young Dessel learned to endure. He learned to make himself small, to read the warning signs in his father's movements, to know when to flee, and when fleeing would only make it worse. He learned that the world was cruel, that strength was the only currency that mattered, and that weakness invited only suffering. The mines of Apatros were hell given physical form. Children as young as 8 were sent into the tunnels, their small frames useful for reaching cortosis deposits in narrow passages where grown men couldn't fit. The air was thick with dust that coated lungs and left miners coughing blood by their 40th year, if they lived that long. Cave-ins were common. Accidents were frequent. Death was a constant companion that walked the tunnels with every shift. Dessel went into the mines at age 10. His father, eager to be rid of him and equally eager for the extra credits, had him assigned to the worst sections, the deepest and most dangerous. Other miners' children might have protectors, older workers who'd watch out for them. Dessel had no one. He was the drunk son, the boy everyone knew was unwanted, and in a place where compassion was already scarce, he received none. But something stirred within Dessel, something he didn't understand. When the overseer's son, a cruel boy named Gerd, would torment him, sometimes Gerd would trip over his own feet at just the right moment. When another miner, a massive man named Forvus, tried to steal Dessel's rations, the support beam the man was standing under groaned and shifted, and Forvus learned to leave the boy alone. Dessel thought it was luck. He had no concept of the Force, no understanding that he was touching something vast and ancient, bending reality itself to his unconscious will. Years crawled by in that darkness. Dessel grew from a frightened child into a young man hardened by constant struggle. His body, shaped by a brutal labor, became dense with muscle, His mind, tempered by endless cruelty, learned to see opportunity in chaos and advantage in others' weakness. He was not educated in any formal sense. Apatros had no schools for the miners' children, but he was learning lessons far more primal, lessons written in bruises and hunger and the simple mathematics of survival. His father grew worse with age. The alcohol consumed Hurst from the inside out, turning a merely abusive man into something monstrous. The beatings intensified. The verbal abuse became more creative in its cruelty. And then came the night when Hurst, in a drunken rage over some imagined slight, picked up a mining tool and advanced on his son with murder in his eyes. Dessel was 16 years old. He had endured a lifetime of abuse, but something in him finally broke, or perhaps finally awakened. He felt anger rise within him, hot and pure and righteous, and with it came power. He didn't strike his father. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply wanted his father to stop, wanted it with every fiber of his being, and something within the drunken man's brain simply gave out. Hurst dropped the tool, stumbled backward, and collapsed. By morning, he was dead, his mind destroyed by an aneurysm that the doctors couldn't explain. Dessel felt nothing at his father's funeral. No grief, no guilt, no relief. Only a strange hollowness and a question he couldn't quite articulate. Had he done that? Had he somehow, impossibly, killed his father with nothing but a thought and a surge of rage? The idea seemed insane, the stuff of legends and children's tales about ancient sorcerers. And yet, deep down, Dessel knew. He had reached out with something, touched his father's mind, and snuffed out the flame of his consciousness like pinching out a candle. He tried to move forward, to continue his life in the mines, but the knowledge of what he'd done, what he could do, changed everything. He became more aware of the strange occurrences around him, the way reality seemed to bend when his emotions ran high. He began to suspect he was different, perhaps dangerously so, though he still had no framework to understand what that meant. Then came the incident that would change everything. Dessel had a single friend on Apatros, an older miner named Groshik, who ran a cantina where the miners would gather after their shifts. Groshik treated Dessel with something approaching kindness, perhaps seeing in the young man a reflection of his own hard life. One evening, a group of Republic soldiers entered the cantina, officers on leave looking for entertainment and finding it in tormenting the local miners. One officer in particular, an ensign with a cruel smirk and too much drink in him, decided to make Dessel his target. He mocked the young miner, prodded him, tried to provoke a reaction that would justify violence. Dessel tried to ignore him, tried to walk away, but the ensign followed, pushing, taunting, until finally placing a hand on Dessel and shoving him hard. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would give conflicting accounts. Dessel spun, his body moving with a speed and precision that seemed impossible, and his fist connected with the ensign's face. But it wasn't just a punch. Something more flowed through Dessel in that moment, a surge of raw power that sent the officer flying backward with bone-shattering force. The ensign's head struck the wall, and he crumpled, dead, before his body finished falling. The cantina fell silent. Dessel stared at his hand, at the dead Republic officer, and understood immediately what this meant. Killing a Republic soldier was a capital offense. The Republic military would come for him, arrest him, execute him. His life on Apatros, miserable as it had been, was over. Groshik acted quickly. He had connections with smugglers, with people who could move someone off-world if the credits were right. Within hours, Dessel found himself in the cargo hold of a ship bound for parts unknown, his old life disappearing behind him. Groshik had also given him information. The Sith were recruiting. There was a war raging across the galaxy, and the Brotherhood of Darkness needed soldiers. In Sith territory, no one would care about a dead Republic officer. In fact, it might even be considered a qualification. As Dessel sat in that dark cargo hold, feeling the ship's engines thrum beneath him, he made a decision. The boy called Dessel, the victim, the son of a drunk, the bane of his father's existence. That person was dead. Whoever emerged on the other side of this journey would be someone new, someone strong, someone who would never again be powerless or afraid. He didn't yet know about the Force. He didn't understand what he truly was, but he knew with absolute certainty that his path led toward darkness, toward power, toward a destiny far greater than dying in the cortosis mines of a forgotten outer rim world. The galaxy was at war, and war created opportunities for men willing to seize them. Dessel had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The cargo ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying him toward his future, toward the Sith, toward transformation, toward becoming something the galaxy would one day fear, toward becoming Bane. Baptism in war. The ship that carried Dessel away from Apatros was a battered freighter that smelled of fuel, sweat, and desperation. Its captain asked no questions, accepted Groshik's credits, and deposited his passenger on Feda, a world in the Outer Rim that had recently fallen under Sith control. Here, the Brotherhood of Darkness was recruiting anyone with a pulse and a willingness to hold a blaster. Dessel had both, and within days, he found himself inducted into the Sith military machine. The Brotherhood of Darkness was unlike the Sith orders of old. For millennia, the Sith had been ruled by Dark Lords who claimed ultimate authority, creating hierarchies of power that inevitably led to infighting, betrayal, and self-destruction. The Brotherhood sought to change that. Its founder, a charismatic fallen Jedi named Skir Khan, had a revolutionary idea: equality among the Sith Lords. Khan declared that every Sith of sufficient power would hold the title of Dark Lord, that they would rule collectively, that the old ways of master and apprentice struggling for supremacy would end. The Brotherhood would present a united front against the Jedi and the Republic, and through cooperation rather than competition, they would finally achieve what generations of Sith had failed to accomplish: total victory. It was a beautiful idea. It was also fundamentally flawed, though Dessel didn't know that yet. What he knew is that the Brotherhood needed soldiers, thousands upon thousands of them, to feed into the meat grinder of the new Sith Wars. These wars had raged for nearly 1,000 years, consuming entire star systems and billions of lives. The galaxy was exhausted. The Republic was crumbling, and the Jedi were spread thin, trying to hold back the tide of darkness. Dessel was assigned to the Gloom Walkers, a unit composed primarily of non-force sensitive soldiers who served as infantry for the Sith war machine. His commanding officer was a Sith Lord named Kopech, a Twi'lek, who had once been a Jedi before falling to the dark side. Kopech was different from the other officers. He actually seemed to care about his soldiers, about winning battles with strategy rather than just throwing bodies at the enemy until one side ran out of warriors. Basic training was brutal. The Republic military was professional, disciplined, organized. The Sith Army was chaos given military structure. Soldiers were expected to be ruthless, to show no mercy, to embrace fear and anger and hatred as tools. Dessel excelled. Everything he had learned in the mines, how to endure pain, how to identify weakness, how to strike quickly and without hesitation, served him well. More importantly, combat awakened something in him. On Apatros, his power had been unconscious, random, erupting only in moments of extreme emotion. Here, in battle, something crystallized. When his unit engaged Republic forces on the war-torn world of Kashyyyk, Dessel found himself moving with impossible speed, his blaster shots hitting targets he couldn't possibly see, his instincts warning him of danger before it manifested. In one engagement, a Republic trooper managed to flank the Gloom Walker's position. Dessel, still green and barely trained, found himself facing 3 soldiers at once. Logic said he should die. Instead, he felt something surge through him, felt the world slow down around him, and his body moved before his mind could catch up. He dispatched all 3 soldiers in seconds, moving like liquid death, his blaster singing a song of destruction. The other soldiers in his unit started to notice. They gave him a wide berth, speaking about him in hushed tones. There was something wrong with Dessel, something unnatural. He seemed to know things before they happened. He survived situations that should have killed him. And when he got angry, when the battle fury took him, he became something terrifying, an avatar of destruction that left nothing but corpses in his wake. It was Kopech who finally understood what Dessel was. After a particularly brutal battle, the Sith Lord called him aside. Kopech looked at the young soldier with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone into something deeper, and he smiled. "You're force-sensitive," Kopech said simply. "Probably quite powerful, though untrained. You've been using it unconsciously your entire life, haven't you? That's why you survived. That's why you're different." Dessel had no framework to understand what that meant. The Force was something from stories, the power of Jedi and Sith, beings who could move objects with their minds and see the future. He was just a miner's son, just a killer on the run. But Kopech explained, patient and thorough, about the energy field that bound the galaxy together, about how some individuals could touch that power and bend it to their will. "The Jedi believe the Force should serve peace and justice," Kopech said, and his smile turned cold. "They're fools. The Force is power, raw and primal. The dark side is about embracing that power, about using your emotions, your fear, your anger, your hatred, as fuel to become stronger than any Jedi could dream. And you, Dessel, have been doing that instinctively since you were a child." The revelation shook something loose in Dessel's understanding of himself. Every strange occurrence in his life, suddenly made sense. His father's death, his survival in the mines, his combat prowess, all of it was connected to this power flowing through him. And if Kopech was right, if he could learn to control it, to weaponize it consciously, rather than relying on instinct, he could become something far greater than a simple soldier. Kopech made him an offer. The Brotherhood maintained academies where Force-sensitive individuals were trained in the ways of the Sith. The greatest of these was on Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld, where the most promising students studied directly under the Brotherhood's most powerful lords. If Dessel went there, if he devoted himself to training, he could become a Sith Lord himself, could wield the kind of power that shaped galaxies, but there was a condition. Dessel would need to leave behind his old identity completely. The academies demanded total commitment. Students who couldn't meet the standards didn't wash out. They died. Competition was encouraged, weakness was culled. Only the strongest survived to claim the title of Sith Lord. Dessel didn't hesitate. He'd spent his entire life being powerless, being victimized, being told he was worthless. Now he was being offered a chance to become powerful beyond measure, to never again be at anyone's mercy. The risk of death meant nothing. He'd been living with that risk his entire life. At least now he'd be risking it for something worthwhile. "I'll go," he said. "But I won't be Dessel anymore." That name belonged to a victim, to someone weak. If I'm going to become a Sith, I need a new name. Kopech nodded approvingly. "Choose carefully." Names have power. They shape how others see you and how you see yourself. Dessel thought of his father's words, that cruel nickname that had been meant to wound, the bane of his existence. But he heard it differently now. Not a weakness, but a promise. Not a curse, but a title. He would be the bane of his enemy's existence. He would be the thing that destroyed those who stood against him. "Bane," he said. "From now on, I am Bane." Kopech smiled, and in that smile was approval and something else, recognition. "Very well, Bane. I'll make the arrangements. You leave for Korriban within the week. Train hard, grow strong, and perhaps one day you'll stand among the Brotherhood as a Dark Lord yourself." But even as Kopech spoke those words, Bane felt something stir within him, an intuition he couldn't quite name. The Brotherhood of Darkness spoke of equality and cooperation, but everything Bane had learned about life suggested that such ideals were illusions. Strength would always dominate weakness. Ambition would always breed competition. The Brotherhood's philosophy seemed, to his cynical eye, designed more to prevent strong Sith from seizing power than to actually win the war. He said nothing, though. He accepted Kopech's congratulations, gathered his meager belongings, and prepared for the journey to Korriban. Whatever doubts he had about the Brotherhood's philosophy could wait. First, he needed to claim power for himself. First, he needed to survive the academy and become something more than a grunt with a blaster. The transport that carried him to Korriban was filled with other Force-sensitive recruits, young men and women who had shown potential in the ranks or been discovered by Sith scouts. They eyed each other with suspicion and hostility. All of them understood that they were competitors, that only some would survive training, that friendship was a liability and trust a fool's weakness. Bane sat apart from the others, silent and watchful. He was older than most, harder, shaped by experiences that made the other recruits' stories of hardship seem trivial. They had fallen to darkness through ideology or ambition or hurt feelings. Bane had been born in darkness, had never known anything else, and that gave him an advantage they couldn't match. When the ship finally emerged from hyperspace near Korriban, Bane pressed his face to a viewport and saw the planet below. It was a world of red sand and ancient tombs, of lingering dark power that made his skin prickle, even from orbit. This was where the Sith species had once lived, where the first Dark Jedi had claimed dominion, where countless Dark Lords had been buried in grand monuments to their power. The Valley of the Dark Lords, they called it. And now, Bane would walk among those ancient tombs, would train in the shadow of legends, would prove himself worthy of joining the lineage of the Sith. He felt no fear, only anticipation. He had been forged in the mines of Apatros and tempered in the fires of war. The Academy would break many of his fellow students. It would not break him. It would only make him stronger. And if he had to step over the corpses of 100 rivals to claim his power, then so be it. That was the way of the Sith. That was the way of survival. That was the way Bane understood. In his bones, the galaxy truly worked. The transport began its descent, and Bane prepared himself for the next chapter of his transformation. He had been a victim. He had been a soldier. Now he would become something more. Now he would learn to consciously wield the power that had always moved through him. Now he would become Sith. The Academy of Blood. The Sith Academy on Korriban was a towering pyramid of black stone that rose from the Valley of the Dark Lords like a monument to darkness itself. Its architecture was designed to inspire dread, with massive statues of ancient Sith Lords flanking the entrance and walls carved with scenes of conquest and suffering. This was not a place of learning in any conventional sense. This was a forge where raw, force-sensitive material was hammered into weapons or shattered into fragments. And the Academy cared nothing for which outcome any individual student met. Bane stepped off the transport with the other new arrivals, feeling the weight of the place immediately. The dark side was thick here, concentrated by millennia of Sith presence and the proximity to so many tombs of dead Dark Lords. It pressed against his consciousness like a physical force, testing him, challenging him to either resist or embrace it. Bane did neither. He simply opened himself to it, let it flow through him, and felt his power surge in response. The students were gathered in a great hall where the Academy's headmaster, a human Sith Lord named Kortosis, addressed them. Kortosis was old, his face lined with age and scarred by decades of battle. His voice was smooth, cultured, utterly cold. "Welcome to Korriban," Kortosis said. "Most of you will die here. Some will fall in training accidents. Others will be killed by their fellow students. A few will simply break under the pressure and take their own lives. This is not a tragedy. This is selection. The Sith do not accept weakness. We do not coddle failure. We demand excellence, and those who cannot provide it have no place among us." He let that sink in, his gaze sweeping across the assembled students. You will be trained in the ways of the dark side by some of the most powerful Sith in the galaxy. You will study lightsaber combat under Blade Master Kasim. You will learn Force techniques from masters who have perfected their arts over decades. You will have access to the Academy archives, which contain knowledge stretching back thousands of years. But knowledge alone will not save you. Power alone will not save you. Only the combination of strength, cunning, and will can transform you from hopeful students into true Sith Lords. The students were divided into groups, assigned to different instructors, and sent to begin their training. Bane found himself in a cohort of 20 students under the direct instruction of Lord Cortus himself. It was meant to be an honor. Cortus only taught the most promising students, but Bane understood immediately that it also meant higher expectations and more brutal competition. The first days at the Academy were a shock, even for someone as hardened as Bane. The instructors were merciless. Mistakes were punished with pain. Hesitation was met with contempt. The students were encouraged to fight each other, to test themselves constantly, to view every interaction as a potential combat scenario. Friendships, if they formed at all, were temporary alliances that dissolved the moment they ceased being useful. Bane threw himself into training with fierce determination. He practiced lightsaber forms for hours until his muscles screamed and his hands bled. He meditated on the dark side, learning to consciously draw upon his anger and hatred rather than letting them explode unconsciously. He studied the archives, devouring texts on Sith philosophy, ancient battles, and Force techniques that had been perfected by Dark Lords long dead. The lightsaber training was overseen by Kasim, a legendary blade master who had mastered all 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Kasim was a Twi'lek like Kopech, but where Kopech had been relatively kind, Kasim was absolutely ruthless. His teaching method was simple. He threw students into combat scenarios and let them learn through pain and near-death experiences. A training saber will burn, but not kill, Kasim told his students. But the pain is real, and the lessons you learn here will determine whether you survive your first real duel. Fight like your life depends on it, because one day soon it will. The training sabers looked like standard lightsabers, but had their power drastically reduced. A direct hit would cause serious burns and incapacitating pain, but wouldn't immediately kill. More insidiously, the weapons were often coated with small barbs that had been treated with weak poisons. A fighter who took too many hits would find their reflexes slowing, their vision blurring, their body failing them. It was Kasim's way of teaching students that in real combat, wounds were cumulative, and even small injuries could lead to death. Bane proved to be a natural duelist. His combat experience in the military had taught him timing and spatial awareness. His instincts, honed by years of survival, allowed him to anticipate his opponent's moves. He rose quickly through the ranks of his cohort, defeating student after student in the dueling circle. But there was one student he couldn't beat, a Zabrak named Sirak, whose yellow skin was marked with black tribal tattoos and whose eyes burned with sadistic glee. Sirak was a prodigy, the best duelist the Academy had seen in years. He wielded a double-bladed lightsaber with devastating effect, and he took particular pleasure in humiliating his opponents. More troublingly, Serac had noticed Bane's rapid ascent and decided to make an example of him. In the toxic social environment of the Academy, being targeted by the top student meant that others would avoid you, that you'd become isolated and vulnerable. Serac challenged Bane publicly, and Bane, unable to refuse without looking weak, accepted. The duel was a massacre. Serac was simply better, faster, more experienced. He broke through Bane's defenses with contemptuous ease and spent the next several minutes methodically beating him, not trying to win quickly, but instead prolonging Bane's suffering. Every hit from the training saber was precisely placed to cause maximum pain, every poisoned barb cut deep. By the time Serac finally knocked Bane unconscious, Bane's body was a mess of burns and wounds, and the watching students had learned a valuable lesson. Challenging Serac was suicide, but the physical defeat was nothing compared to what happened next. As Bane recovered in the medical facilities, something went wrong inside him. The constant exposure to pain, the humiliation, the defeat, it triggered something deep in his psyche, a memory he'd been suppressing. He remembered killing his father. He remembered the power he'd felt in that moment, the rush of dark energy as he destroyed another human being's mind. And he realized with crystal clarity that he'd murdered his own father, not in self-defense, not accidentally. He'd wanted Hurst dead, had hated him with a pure and terrible hatred, and had killed him with the dark side of the Force. That revelation, that acknowledgement of what he truly was, shook Bane to his core. He'd known abstractly that he was studying to become a Sith, that he was learning to wield dark power, but confronting the reality of what he'd already done, the line he'd already crossed, was different. Doubt crept in. Was this what he wanted to become? A killer, a monster, someone defined by hatred and power? He thought of his father, broken and pathetic, consumed by bitterness. Was Bane just following the same path, just reaching for power to compensate for the wounds life had given him? The doubt was poison. The dark side fed on conviction, on certainty, on the absolute belief that one's actions were justified. Bane's newfound guilt and uncertainty disrupted his connection to the Force. His power, which had been growing steadily, suddenly seemed distant, muted. In training, he fumbled techniques he'd mastered. In duels, he lost to students he'd previously beaten. The other Sith students sensed his weakness like predators scenting blood. They turned on him with savage enthusiasm. Bane found himself isolated, mocked, relegated to the bottom of the Academy's brutal hierarchy. Cortosis and the other instructors largely ignored him. A student who'd lost their edge was no longer worth their time. Only Qasim sometimes watched him with what might have been disappointment, as if he'd seen potential in Bane that was now being wasted. In desperation, Bane challenged Serac again. Perhaps he thought that by confronting his fear, by throwing himself back into combat, he could break through whatever was blocking him. Perhaps he just wanted to prove he wasn't broken. Either way, it was a mistake. Serac accepted with obvious delight and proceeded to utterly destroy Bane a second time. This beating was even worse than the first, more thorough, more sadistic. Sirac made sure everyone was watching, made sure the lesson was clear. Bane was nothing, nobody, a failure who'd briefly shown promise before collapsing under pressure. Bane woke up in the medical facility again, his body a landscape of pain, and seriously considered giving up. What was the point? He couldn't access the dark side properly anymore. He couldn't compete with the other students. He was right back where he'd started, on Apatros, powerless, victimized, trapped. But surrender wasn't in his nature. If he couldn't fight, he could study. If he couldn't compete in the dueling circle, he could compete in the archives. Bane began spending every waking hour in the Academy library, reading everything he could find about Sith history, philosophy, and technique. He read accounts of ancient Dark Lords, studied their successes and failures, tried to understand what separated the legends from the forgotten failures. And in those archives, among those ancient texts, Bane began to notice something disturbing. The greatest Sith Lords of history, Marka Ragnos, Naga Sado, Freeden Nod, Exar Kun, they all wielded absolute power. They ruled their empires with iron fists. They did not share authority. They did not believe in equality among Dark Lords. They took the title of Darth, a title ancient and powerful, and they stood alone at the pinnacle of Sith power. But the Brotherhood of Darkness had abandoned that model. Lord Kaan had convinced the Sith to share power equally, to all take the title of Dark Lord, to rule by consensus. And for 1,000 years, the Sith had been fighting the Jedi to a stalemate. No decisive victories, no overwhelming conquests, just endless, grinding war that consumed both sides. Bane began to suspect that this was not a coincidence. The Brotherhood's philosophy, noble as it might sound, was fundamentally weak. It prevented the strongest Sith from claiming absolute authority. It meant that every major decision had to be debated and approved by committee. It made the Sith predictable, conventional, diluted. The ancient Sith would have scorned such an organization. They understood that power concentrated, that the strong ruled and the weak served, that this was not cruelty but the fundamental law of the universe. The dark side itself taught this lesson. It flowed to those who could command it, who could bend it, through sheer force of will. It didn't distribute itself equally. It didn't care about fairness. As Bane studied, as these ideas crystallized in his mind, something else happened. His connection to the dark side began to return. The doubt that had poisoned him was being replaced by a different kind of certainty. Not a certainty about whether he was good or evil. He'd moved beyond such simple categories. Instead, a certainty about how the galaxy truly worked, about the nature of power, about his place in the grand design. He understood now that his father's death was not something to feel guilty about. Hurst had been weak, cruel, a genetic dead end. By killing him, Bane had actually done what nature should have done, removed a defective specimen from the breeding pool. That sounded cold, even monstrous. But Bane was beginning to understand that the dark side demanded such thinking. Sentimentality was a luxury. Power required ruthlessness. His training began to improve. The cloud that had hung over him lifted. He still couldn't beat Sirac, not yet, but he was no longer the pathetic failure he'd been. Other students began to watch him with renewed wariness. Cortus noticed his resurgence and resumed taking interest in his progress. And then Bane met someone who would change everything. Her name was Githany, and she was a former Jedi. Githany arrived at the Academy like a comet, blazing across a dark sky, brilliant, dangerous, impossible to ignore. She was human, beautiful in a way that weaponized male attention, and she carried herself with the poise of someone who'd spent years among the Jedi Order's elite before casting off those shackles and embracing the darkness. Her story was the kind that Academy students whispered about in shadowed corners. She'd been a Jedi Padawan, marked for greatness, until she discovered that her master was denying her knowledge and holding back her training out of fear that she might surpass him. Rather than accept this, she'd killed him and fled to the Sith. The Brotherhood had welcomed her with open arms, recognizing both her potential and the propaganda value of a former Jedi publicly rejecting the Order's teachings. Bane first encountered her in the archives, where she was reviewing a text on ancient Sith battle meditation. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Not love. Sith didn't love, couldn't afford such vulnerability, but recognition. Two predators acknowledging each other's danger. "You're the one who challenged Serac twice and got destroyed both times," she said, her tone making it unclear whether this was mockery or respect. "I'm the one who's going to kill him eventually," Bane replied. Githany smiled. "Confident. I like that. Most of the students here are either terrified of Serac or worshiping him. You're something different." They began training together in secret. Githany had years of Jedi instruction, formal techniques that Bane had never learned. She taught him meditation methods that helped focus his power, showed him footwork that improved his dueling, shared knowledge she'd gained from her former masters. In return, Bane shared what he'd learned from the archives, the historical knowledge and philosophical insights he'd been accumulating. Their relationship was complicated, layered with attraction and manipulation and mutual recognition. Githany clearly had her own agenda. She wanted allies who might help her rise through the Brotherhood's ranks. Bane knew this and didn't care. He was using her as much as she was using him. This was the Sith way. Trust was weakness, but temporary alliances served a purpose. Under Githany's instruction, Bane's power grew dramatically. His connection to the dark side, already restored, deepened further. He began to understand techniques and concepts that had previously eluded him. Within weeks, he'd gone from being one of the weakest students to being competitive with some of the best. But even as his practical skills improved, Bane's philosophical questions about the Brotherhood intensified. He'd been reading more and more of the ancient texts, particularly those written by Darth Revan. Revan was fascinating to Bane, a Jedi who'd become a Sith, then a Jedi again who'd walked both sides of the Force and written extensively about what he'd learned. One passage in particular struck Bane like lightning. Any master who instructs more than one apprentice in the ways of the dark side is a fool. In time, the apprentices will unite their strength and overthrow the master. It is inevitable, axiomatic. That is why each master must have only one student. The concept was revolutionary and obvious at the same time. Of course, apprentices would unite against their master if given the chance. Of course, having multiple powerful students created a built-in weakness. The ancient Sith had understood this, which was why they'd maintained strict hierarchies with clear lines of succession through challenge and conquest. But the Brotherhood had abandoned this wisdom. Khan trained multiple students. Every Sith Lord trained multiple students. They were creating a situation where there were dozens of powerful Dark Lords with competing ambitions and no clear mechanism for determining who should lead. It was a recipe for internal conflict, for the kind of infighting that had weakened the Sith throughout history. Bane brought his concerns to Cortus, expecting the headmaster to either explain why he was wrong or acknowledge the validity of his insights. Instead, Cortus dismissed him with barely concealed contempt. The Brotherhood's philosophy was not up for debate. The old ways had failed. Lord Ka'an's vision was the path forward. Students who questioned this were not demonstrating intelligence. They were demonstrating arrogance and ignorance. The response told Bane everything he needed to know. Cortus wasn't interested in truth or effectiveness. He was interested in maintaining the Brotherhood's power structure, even if that structure was fundamentally flawed. The instructors had invested too much in Khan's vision to question it now. They would rather lose the war than admit they'd been wrong. This realization was liberating and terrifying at once. Liberating because Bane now understood that he didn't need to accept the Brotherhood's teachings blindly. Terrifying because he was surrounded by Sith Lords who would kill him if they realized the depth of his heresy. He began studying even more intensely, focusing specifically on texts that predated the Brotherhood. He read everything he could find about Darth Revan, about Freeden Nad, about the ancient Dark Lords who'd wielded absolute power. He learned about the title of Darth, not just a name, but a symbol of ultimate authority, a declaration that the bearer stood above all other Sith. The Brotherhood had stopped using that title. Khan called himself Lord Khan, and every other Sith was Lord or Lady. The title of Darth had fallen into disuse, treated as an archaic remnant of a failed system. But Bane, reading the histories, understood that abandoning the title was symbolic of a much larger problem. By making everyone equal, the Brotherhood had made everyone mediocre. Meanwhile, his relationship with Githani was growing more complex. She'd started hinting that she wanted him to kill Serac, that with the Zabrak out of the way, Bane could claim his rightful place as the Academy's premier student. Bane suspected she had her own reasons for wanting Serac dead, probably related to some insult or rejection. But he was happy to use her scheming for his own purposes. The problem was that Serac was still better than him. Bane had improved dramatically, but the Zabrak remained the Academy's deadliest fighter. A third challenge would likely end the same way as the first two, and Bane might not survive another such beating. Then Lord Khan himself arrived at the Academy. The Brotherhood's founder came to inspect the students and recruit the best of them for a major campaign on Ruusan, where the Sith and Jedi had been locked in brutal stalemate for months. Khan needed fresh blood, new Dark Lords to throw into the meat grinder, and Korriban's Academy was his recruiting ground. Bane watched Khan address the students, and he saw immediately why this man had managed to unite the Sith behind his vision. Khan was charismatic, eloquent, genuinely inspiring. He spoke of the Brotherhood's sacred mission, of the injustice of Jedi oppression, of the glorious future that awaited once victory was achieved. It was a masterful performance. It was also hollow. Bane, his mind sharpened by weeks of study and philosophical reflection, saw through the rhetoric. Khan was a true believer in his own vision, which made him more dangerous than a mere liar, but also more limited. He couldn't conceive that his philosophy might be wrong because he'd built his entire identity around it. The Brotherhood would continue its current path until it either won or destroyed itself, and Khan would never consider an alternative. Khan announced that he was promoting several students to the rank of Dark Lord and taking them to Ruusan. Sirac was among them, and of course, so was Githini. Bane expected to be passed over. He'd improved, but he wasn't yet among the absolute best. To his surprise, Cortus recommended him as well. "You've shown remarkable progress," Cortus told him privately. "Your dedication to study and your philosophical inquiries show promise, even if some of your questions have been unorthodox. Lord Khan has agreed to grant you the rank of Dark Lord and a position in his forces." Bane should have been thrilled. This was what he'd been working toward. But instead, he felt only hollowness. The title of Dark Lord meant nothing when it was handed out to dozens of students at once. It was a participation trophy, an administrative designation, not a true acknowledgement of supreme power. He was about to accept anyway. What choice did he have? When Githini approached him with an offer. She'd spoken to Sirac, she said, and convinced him that Bane was finally worthy of being allowed into the Zabrik's inner circle. Sirac wanted to meet with Bane in the archives, wanted to bury their rivalry before they all left for Ruusan together. It was obviously a trap. Sirac wanted to hurt him one more time, to establish dominance before they joined Khan's forces. But Bane agreed to meet anyway, because he'd realized something. He didn't care what Sirac wanted. This was going to be the moment Bane either proved himself capable of claiming real power or died trying. He arrived at the archives at the appointed time. The vast chamber was empty. Githini had arranged for them to have privacy. Sirac was waiting, his double-bladed lightsaber already ignited, his smile showing too many teeth. "I'm going to cripple you," Sirac said conversationally. "Nothing that won't heal eventually, but I want you to remember your place. I want you to spend the entire campaign on Ruusan knowing that I am better than you, that you'll always be less than me." Bane said nothing. He simply ignited his own lightsaber and settled into a fighting stance. And then, before Sirac could make the first move, Githini appeared from behind a bookshelf. Not to help Sirac as he'd expected, but to toss Bane his actual combat lightsaber, the one he'd earned through training, not a practice weapon. "Surprise," Githini said sweetly. "I lied to both of you, but I lied to him more." Sirac's two friends, a pair of Zabrak twins named Yevra and Loke, emerged from their hiding places. They'd been backup, insurance in case Bane proved more dangerous than expected. But now they found themselves facing not just Bane, but Githini as well, and the balance of power had shifted. What followed was not a duel, but a slaughter. Githany dispatched the twins with brutal efficiency, her light whip, an exotic weapon she'd trained with extensively, wrapping around their blades and leaving them vulnerable to killing strikes. Meanwhile, Bane and Serac engaged in single combat, and for the first time, Bane fought without fear or doubt or the internal blocks that had plagued him. He let the dark side flow through him completely. He embraced every bit of anger he'd ever felt toward his father, toward the cruelty of his childhood, toward every person who'd ever hurt him or called him worthless. That rage became fuel, became power, became a raging inferno that made him faster, stronger, deadlier than he'd ever been. Serac realized too late that something had changed. The student he'd beaten twice was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Bane's blade moved like lightning. His defenses were perfect, his counters devastating. Within minutes, Serac found himself on the defensive, his confidence evaporating as Bane pressed the attack relentlessly. The final exchange lasted seconds. Bane feinted high. Serac took the bait, and Bane's blade came around in a horizontal arc that severed the Zabrak's head from his body. Serac's corpse hit the ground, and Bane stood over it, breathing hard, his lightsaber still humming. "You shouldn't have killed him," Githany said quietly. "Cortus will be furious. Serac was his best student." "I don't care what Cortus thinks," Bane replied. And he realized as he said it that this was absolutely true. He didn't care about Cortus's approval, didn't care about the Brotherhood's ranking system, didn't care about any of it. He'd spent too much time reading about real power, about true Sith philosophy, to accept the Brotherhood's watered-down version. He marched to Cortus's chambers, Githany trailing behind him looking worried, and confronted the headmaster directly. Cortus was indeed furious about Serac's death, but before he could speak, Bane cut him off. "Your Brotherhood is a failure," Bane said flatly. "I've read the histories. I've studied the ancient Sith. Everything you're teaching here is wrong. The old Sith lords took the title of Darth because it meant something. It meant supreme authority, absolute power. You've turned it into an administrative rank that you hand out like candy. You've made everyone equal, which means you've made everyone weak." Cortus stared at him, shock giving way to anger. "You dare—" "I dare," Bane interrupted, "because I see what you refuse to see. The Brotherhood is losing this war because it's built on a flawed philosophy. The ancient Sith would have conquered the Republic by now, but you're too afraid of conflict, too committed to Ka'an's vision of cooperation to do what needs to be done." "And what needs to be done?" Cortus asked, his voice cold. "The Brotherhood needs to be destroyed," Bane said. "The Sith need to return to the old ways. And I'm taking the title you abandoned. From now on, I am Darth Bane, not a Lord, a Darth. And I'm leaving this academy to find real knowledge, real power, not the sanitized garbage you're teaching." He turned and walked away before Cortus could respond, before the headmaster could call guards or try to stop him. Githany caught up with him at the landing pad where Cortus's personal ship was docked. "You've lost your mind," she said. "Khan will kill you for this." The entire Brotherhood will hunt you." "Then let them try," Bane replied. He was accessing the ship's security systems, using some slicing techniques he'd picked up from a former smuggler in his military unit. "I'm going to Rakata Prime. I'm going to find Darth Revan's holocron, and I'm going to learn what the ancient Sith knew that this Brotherhood has forgotten." He got the ship's systems unlocked and climbed aboard. Githani stood at the base of the ramp looking torn. "Come with me," Bane offered, "or don't, but make your choice quickly." She shook her head. "I believe in what Khan is trying to do. I think you're wrong about the Brotherhood, but I hope you survive whatever madness you're chasing." Bane nodded once, then sealed the ship and launched toward the sky. Below him, Korriban fell away, and with it, the Brotherhood's academy, the broken philosophy he'd briefly tried to accept, the shallow imitation of Sith power that passed for training. He was done with teachers, done with organizations, done with anyone else's vision of what the Sith should be. He'd find Revan's holocron, learn the true secrets of the dark side, and then he'd do what needed to be done. He'd destroy the Brotherhood of Darkness and rebuild the Sith the right way. One master, one apprentice. No dilution of power, no committee decisions, no false equality. The galaxy was about to learn what real Sith power looked like, and it would begin with a young man who'd renamed himself Bane, who'd rejected everything he'd been taught, who decided that the only path to true power lay through the ruins of the past and the wisdom of the ancient Dark Lords. The ship jumped to hyperspace, and Darth Bane left his old life behind, heading toward a destiny that would reshape the Sith Order and ultimately the entire galaxy. Pilgrimage to the unknown. The coordinates for Rakata Prime, also called Lihon, had been buried deep in an ancient text Bane had found in the Korriban archives. The planet was legendary in Sith history. Once the capital of the Infinite Empire, a civilization that had risen and fallen millennia before the Republic itself was born. The Rakata had been a force-sensitive species who'd built their technology around dark side power, who'd enslaved countless worlds, and who'd ultimately been destroyed by their own creation, the Star Forge. Darth Revan had discovered Rakata Prime during the Jedi Civil War 3,000 years earlier. He'd claimed the Star Forge, used it to build an armada, and nearly conquered the galaxy before being betrayed by his apprentice Malak. But before that betrayal, Revan had hidden a holocron on Rakata Prime, a repository of his knowledge and philosophy that represented everything he'd learned about the dark side. Bane had read Revan's scattered writings in the Korriban archives and had become obsessed with the ancient Dark Lord. Revan had walked both sides of the Force, understood both Jedi and Sith philosophy, and had arrived at conclusions that seemed to transcend either tradition. More importantly, Revan had explicitly written about the folly of having multiple apprentices, about the necessity of limiting Sith numbers to ensure quality over quantity. The journey to Rakata Prime took days, giving Bane time to meditate on what he was about to do. He'd openly defied the Brotherhood, killed one of their most promising students, and stolen a valuable ship. When Khan learned of this, and he would, there'd be consequences. Bane was gambling everything on finding Revan's holocron and learning something that would justify his rebellion. The ship emerged from hyperspace near a world that looked like paradise from orbit. Lush tropical islands scattered across endless oceans, no visible signs of industrialization or civilization. But Bane could feel the dark side pulsing from the planet like a diseased heartbeat. Something terrible had happened here once, and the Force still remembered. He landed on one of the larger islands, near ruins that his instruments identified as matching the description of the Temple of the Ancients from the historical texts. As soon as he stepped off the ship, the weight of the place hit him. The dark side was stronger here than on Korriban, more focused, more potent. It wasn't the accumulated weight of thousands of Sith tombs, it was something else. The residue of ancient atrocities, of Force-powered technologies that had torn reality apart, of civilizations that had played with power beyond their understanding. Bane began searching for the temple entrance, moving through jungle overgrown with vegetation that had reclaimed the Rakatan ruins. As he walked, he encountered the local wildlife, including a rancor, a massive predatory creature that should have torn him apart. Instead, Bane reached out with the Force, touched the beast's primitive mind, and bent it to his will. The rancor became his mount, carrying him toward the temple with unexpected speed. This was new. Bane had never tried to dominate an animal's mind before. But here, on Rakata Prime, with the dark side flowing through him like electricity, it felt natural. The planet itself seemed to be amplifying his power, teaching him things he hadn't known he could do. The Temple of the Ancients was a massive structure of stone and metal, architecture that blended organic curves with geometric precision. The entrance was sealed, but Bane could feel power thrumming behind those doors. He focused, channeling the Force, and the ancient locks responded to his will. The doors ground open, revealing darkness within. Inside the temple was a maze of corridors and chambers, many showing signs of long-ago battles, scorch marks on walls, broken droids scattered across floors, the sense that something violent had occurred here. Bane explored methodically, letting the Force guide him, until finally he found himself in a chamber deep within the temple's lower levels. The room was empty except for a single computer terminal and a wall that seemed oddly smooth compared to the rough stone around it. Bane approached the wall and felt a pulse of power. There was something behind it, something hidden. He reached out with the Force, found the concealment mechanism, and removed the stone. Behind it was a holocron, not a simple data storage device, but a true Sith holocron, a pyramidal artifact that glowed with internal power. Bane picked it up with trembling hands. This was what he'd been searching for. This was Darth Revan's wisdom, preserved across 3 millennia. He activated the holocron, and a holographic figure materialized, a man in Sith robes, his face hidden behind a distinctive mask. The image of Darth Revan studied Bane for a moment, then spoke. "If you've found this, you're likely in need of true understanding of the dark side, not the dogma that passes for Sith philosophy in your time, but the real knowledge that separates masters from fools. Listen carefully, because I will not repeat myself." For the next several hours, Bane sat transfixed as Revan's holocron taught him. The Avatar shared insights about the nature of the Force, techniques for channeling power, and most importantly, philosophical principles that validated everything Bane had begun to suspect about the Brotherhood. The dark side is not evil, Revan explained. It is simply power, raw, honest, primal. The Jedi fear it because they fear themselves, fear what they might become if they embrace their full potential. But fear is a weakness. The dark side must be controlled, directed, used with purpose. Those who give themselves to it completely become slaves to their passions. Those who try to reject it entirely deny half of their nature. The true path lies in mastery, acknowledging the darkness within yourself and bending it to your will. Revan spoke of strength through conflict, of the necessity of challenge and struggle. He explained that peace made civilizations weak, that only through adversity could individuals and societies reach their full potential. The Jedi preached harmony and balance, but they'd created a galaxy that was stagnant, where the weak were protected from natural selection, where mediocrity was tolerated and even celebrated. Any master who instructs more than one apprentice in the ways of the dark side is a fool, Revan said, and Bane leaned forward, hungry for this particular wisdom. In time, the apprentices will unite their strength and overthrow the master. It is inevitable, axiomatic. That is why each master must have only one student. This ensures that when the apprentice surpasses the master and takes their place, the Sith Order grows stronger rather than diluting itself across multiple power bases. This was the rule of two, though Revan hadn't called it that. One master to embody power, one apprentice to crave it. When the apprentice became strong enough to defeat and replace the master, the Sith would evolve. Each generation stronger than the last. No infighting among multiple apprentices, no dilution of knowledge. Just a straight line of succession through combat and conquest. Revan's holocron also contained practical knowledge. Techniques for enhancing physical abilities, methods for sensing danger, instructions for rituals that could achieve extraordinary effects. Among these was something particularly terrible, the thought bomb. The thought bomb was an ancient Sith technique, a ritual that required multiple powerful Force users to channel their energy into a single point. When released, it would kill every Force-sensitive being within its blast radius, ripping their life force away in an instant. The weapon was devastating, but also dangerous. Those who created it could easily be caught in its effect. Bane copied everything from the holocron onto flimsy sheets, filling page after page with notes and diagrams. He memorized techniques and principles, absorbing Revan's wisdom like a man dying of thirst consuming water. Days passed as he studied, leaving the temple only to eat and sleep, returning each morning to learn more. The holocron's gatekeeper, the AI representation of Revan, seemed pleased with Bane's dedication. "You understand," it said on the third day. "You see what others have missed. The Sith of your time have grown weak through dilution. They need someone to remind them what true power looks like, someone willing to do what must be done, regardless of cost. The Brotherhood has to be destroyed," Bane said, voicing the conclusion he'd been building toward. "They'll never accept this philosophy. They're too invested in Khan's vision. The only way forward is to eliminate them and start fresh." "Yes," Revan's avatar agreed. "And I've given you the tool to do it." The thought bomb will serve your purpose perfectly. Give them the knowledge. Let them think it's a weapon they can use against the Jedi. They'll create their own destruction, and you'll be free to rebuild the Sith the right way. Finally, after nearly a week on Rakata Prime, the holocron's power source began to fail. The device was ancient, had been drawing on its limited energy for 3,000 years, and couldn't sustain itself any longer. Revan's image flickered, growing unstable. "My time is ending," the Avatar said, "but yours is just beginning. Remember what you've learned here: patience, cunning, strength, one master, one apprentice, a line of succession that will eventually destroy the Jedi and claim the galaxy. It may take centuries or even millennia, but the Sith will win because they'll be willing to play the long game while the Jedi grow complacent in their false victory." The holocron went dark, its power exhausted. Bane tried to restart it, but the device was dead, its knowledge preserved only in his mind and his notes. He felt a moment of loss. Revan's wisdom had been more valuable than anything he'd learned at the Korriban Academy, but also a sense of completion. He had what he needed. He understood what had to be done. He returned to his ship, his rancor mount following him to the landing site before Bane released it from his control. As he prepped the vessel for departure, he reviewed his plan. The Brotherhood was fighting the Jedi on Ruusan, locked in a stalemate that had been going on for months. Lord Khan would be desperate for an advantage, for some weapon that could break the deadlock. Bane would give him that weapon. He'd share the thought bomb technique, convince Khan to create it, and then ensure that when it was detonated, the Brotherhood would destroy itself while Bane survived. The Jedi would think they'd won, think the Sith were extinct, and in the shadows, Bane would find an apprentice and begin rebuilding. One master, one apprentice. A Sith order that operated in secret, that planned not in years, but in generations, that would wait however long it took to position themselves for ultimate victory. The Jedi would grow complacent. The Republic would grow corrupt. And when the time was right, the Sith would strike, and this time there'd be no Brotherhood to fumble the conquest. Bane set course for Ruusan. His ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying him toward the final battle of the new Sith Wars, toward the moment when the old Sith Order would die and a new one would be born, toward his destiny as the architect of the rule of two. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The Sith would retreat into shadow, would appear to die, would be written off as extinct. And that would be their greatest weapon. The galaxy's certainty that the threat was over, that peace had finally been achieved. But Darth Bane knew better. The Sith were patient. The Sith could wait. And when they finally emerged, 1,000 years hence, they'd be stronger than ever, because they'd be concentrated, focused, undiluted by the weaknesses that had plagued the Brotherhood. Revan had shown him the way. Now, Bane would walk that path no matter where it led or what it cost. The rise of Darth Bane was only beginning, and before he was done, he'd reshape the Sith, and through them, the entire galaxy. Architect of annihilation, Ruusan was dying. Once a verdant world of forests and meadows, it had been transformed into a scarred wasteland by 2 years of continuous warfare. The Army of Light, the Jedi's military force, and the Brotherhood of Darkness had fought 7 separate battles here, each more desperate than the last, and the planet bore the wounds. Forests had been burned to ash, fields had been torn apart by orbital bombardments. The air itself tasted of death and ozone. Bane arrived on Ruusan to find chaos. The Brotherhood was losing, though Lord Kaan refused to admit it. The Jedi, led by a legendary warrior named Lord Hoth, had inflicted severe casualties on the Sith forces. Many Dark Lords were dead, their students slaughtered, the Brotherhood's military machine grinding to a halt under the weight of attrition. Kaan himself was showing signs of mental instability. The stress of command, combined with the constant threat of death and the realization that his grand vision was failing, had begun to crack his legendary confidence. He snapped at his subordinates, made increasingly erratic tactical decisions, and obsessed over finding some advantage that would turn the tide. Into this desperate situation stepped Darth Bane with a solution and a deception. He approached Kaan publicly, kneeling before the Brotherhood's leader and offering his service. He claimed to have been on a vision quest, seeking ancient knowledge that might help the Brotherhood win the war, and he'd found it, a weapon so powerful that it could wipe out the entire army of light in a single stroke. Kaan was immediately suspicious. Bane's defection from the Korriban Academy had been reported, as had his theft of Cortosis' ship and his proclamation of taking the title Darth. The Brotherhood's leader had every reason to distrust this upstart who'd rejected their philosophy. But desperation made people foolish, and Kaan was very desperate indeed. "What weapon?" Kaan demanded. "A thought bomb," Bane explained, "an ancient Sith ritual that requires multiple powerful Force users to channel their energy into a single focal point. When detonated, it kills every Force-sensitive being within its range, Jedi and Sith alike. But if we can position it correctly, if we can lure the Jedi into the right location and then trigger it while most of our forces are safely distant, we can eliminate the army of light in one stroke." It was a lie wrapped around a truth. The thought bomb would indeed kill every Force-sensitive in range, but Bane had no intention of letting the Brotherhood survive its detonation. He wanted them destroyed just as much as he wanted the army of light eliminated. Only through wiping the slate clean could he create his new Sith order. Kaan studied him, trying to detect deception, but Bane had learned much about hiding his true thoughts during his time at the Academy. His face showed only earnest dedication to the Brotherhood's cause. Finally, reluctantly, Kaan nodded. "Show me how to create this weapon." Over the next several days, Bane worked with Kaan and the Brotherhood's surviving Dark Lords, teaching them the ritual Revan's holocron had contained. He was careful to emphasize the danger. The thought bomb was not a weapon to be used lightly, and those who created it must be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The ritual required at least 20 powerful Sith to channel their energy properly, and there was no way to trigger it remotely. Those who created the bomb would need to detonate it manually. He also planted seeds of doubt in private conversations with other Sith Lords. To some, he suggested that Kaan was losing his mind, that the thought bomb was a desperation move born of fear rather than strategy. To others, he hinted that certain Death Lords were planning betrayals, that alliances were fracturing. Bane spread paranoia and suspicion through the Brotherhood's ranks. weakening their cohesion even as Khan desperately tried to maintain unity. Meanwhile, the seventh battle of Ruusan was approaching. Lord Hoth had gathered the bulk of the Jedi forces for what he hoped would be a final, decisive strike against the Sith. Khan, seeing his chance, began preparing the thought bomb ritual. He gathered the most powerful Dark Lords in a network of caves beneath the Valley of the Jedi, where they would perform the ritual and then detonate the weapon when Hoth's forces came within range. Bane made one final manipulation. He went to Ka'an's flagship and, using slicing techniques and careful force manipulation, sent orders to the Sith fleet that appeared to come from Ka'an himself. The orders were simple: engage the Jedi fleet directly, break formation, abandon defensive positions. It was tactically insane, a move that would expose the Sith ships to concentrated fire. But the orders came from Khan, so they were followed. The result was disaster for the Brotherhood's fleet. Without proper formations, without defensive coordination, the Sith ships were systematically destroyed by the superior Jedi forces. The destruction happened so quickly that by the time Khan realized what was occurring, half his fleet was gone and the rest was scattered. But this suited Bane's plan perfectly. With the orbital battle lost, with Sith ships fleeing or being destroyed, the Jedi could focus entirely on the ground assault. Lord Hoth led his army of light into the Valley of the Jedi, bringing with him 100 of the Order's finest knights and masters. They knew the Brotherhood was preparing something. Their precognition warned them of danger. But they also knew this was their best chance to end the war, once and for all. In the caves, Khan and 20 of the Brotherhood's most powerful Dark Lords performed the thought bomb ritual. The energy they channeled was immense, terrifying, a vortex of darkness that seemed to rip at the fabric of reality itself. The air itself crackled with power as they wove their life force into the bomb, creating a weapon that would kill everything force-sensitive within kilometers. Lord Hoth and his 100 Jedi entered the caves, sensing the ritual but determined to stop it. What they didn't realize was that it was already too late. The thought bomb was complete, held in check only by Ka'an's will. When the Jedi were fully committed, when they'd penetrated deep into the cave system, Khan made his choice. "For the Brotherhood," he whispered, and detonated the weapon. The thought bomb exploded outward with a sound that wasn't really a sound, more a tearing of reality itself. The blast wave was invisible to normal sight, but devastating to anything touched by the Force. Jedi and Sith alike were caught in its radius, their life essences ripped away in an instant, their bodies becoming empty husks that collapsed like puppets with cut strings. Lord Hoth died. Lord Ka'an died. 20 Sith Dark Lords did. 100 Jedi Knights and Masters died. In a single moment, both the Brotherhood of Darkness and the Army of Light were effectively destroyed, the bulk of their leadership and power base eliminated. But Darth Bane was not in the caves. He'd positioned himself carefully outside the blast radius, watching from a distance as his plan came to fruition. He felt the disturbance in the Force when the thought bomb detonated, felt the lives snuffed out like candles in a hurricane, and he smiled. The old Sith Order was dead. The Jedi had won a Pyrrhic victory. They'd eliminated the Brotherhood, but at a cost that would cripple them for generations. And in the chaos, Bane would disappear, would be presumed dead along with the rest, would be free to begin his work. As he prepared to leave the battlefield, Bane witnessed something unexpected. A young girl, perhaps 10 years old, was defending herself against two Jedi soldiers who'd survived the thought bomb's detonation. The soldiers were executing survivors, not just Sith, but anyone associated with them. The girl's companion, a native Ruusan creature called a bouncer, had been shot dead, and the girl was furious. As Bane watched, the girl reached out with the Force unconsciously, channeling her rage and grief into a blast of dark energy that killed both soldiers. It was raw, untrained, instinctive, but it was also powerful, more powerful than many trained Sith could manage. Bane approached the girl, who spun toward him with wide, frightened eyes. He could have killed her. She was a witness, a potential complication. Instead, he knelt and looked into her eyes and saw potential. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Rain," the girl whispered, "but my real name is Zannah." "Zannah," Bane repeated. "I saw what you did to those soldiers. You have power, great power, but no training. If you stay here, you'll die or be captured by the Jedi. But if you come with me, I can teach you to use that power properly." The girl looked at him, at the destruction around them, at the corpse of her fallen friend. What choice did she have? The Jedi had killed her companion. Her family was dead. She was alone in a galaxy at war. "Will you teach me to be strong?" Zannah asked. "Yes," Bane promised. "I'll teach you to be strong enough that no one will ever hurt you again, that you'll never have to be afraid or powerless. But it won't be easy, and it won't be kind. The path I walk is one of darkness and power, and if you follow me, there's no going back." Zannah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll follow you." And so Darth Bane, last survivor of the Brotherhood of Darkness, architect of its destruction, father of a new Sith philosophy, claimed his first apprentice. Together, they would establish the rule of two. Together, they would ensure the Sith's survival and eventual triumph. The seventh battle of Ruusan had ended. The new Sith Wars were over. The Jedi believed they'd won, believed the Sith were extinct, and in the shadows, Darth Bane and Darth Zannah disappeared, beginning a journey that would last 1,000 years and end with the fall of the Republic and the Jedi Order. The rise of Darth Bane was complete. The legacy of the Sith Army had only just begun. Legacy of the Sith Army. The aftermath of Ruusan saw the galaxy transform. The Republic, exhausted by 1,000 years of war, underwent sweeping reforms. The Ruusan Reformation centralized government power, demilitarized the Republic, and relegated the Jedi to a more ceremonial role. The Republic military was dissolved, replaced by planetary defense forces. It was supposed to be an age of peace, prosperity, enlightenment. The Jedi declared victory. They'd found the Valley of the Jedi filled with the corpses of both armies and concluded that the Sith had destroyed themselves with their own weapon. A Jedi Knight named Johun Othone built a monument to the fallen, never realizing that in doing so, he was marking the site of one of the most successful deceptions in galactic history. Darth Bane and his young apprentice had vanished completely. For years, They moved through the outer rim, staying in the shadows, learning and growing stronger. Bane trained Zannah personally, teaching her everything he knew about the dark side, passing on Revan's wisdom and his own hard-won insights. He taught her patience, the ability to wait years or even decades for the right opportunity. He taught her cunning, how to manipulate situations and people to achieve goals without ever revealing your hand. Most importantly, he taught her the philosophy of the rule of two. There would only ever be two Sith, a master to embody power and an apprentice to crave it. When the apprentice became strong enough, they would kill the master and take an apprentice of their own. Each generation would be stronger than the last, because only the strongest survived to pass on their knowledge. The Brotherhood failed because they diluted themselves, Bane explained to young Zannah as they trained in secret. They made everyone equal, which made everyone mediocre. We will not make that mistake. We will remain hidden, striking from the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes. The Jedi will grow complacent in their victory. The Republic will grow corrupt as it always does. And when the moment is right, perhaps centuries from now, the Sith will emerge and claim what is rightfully ours. Zannah absorbed these lessons with a dedication that pleased her master. She was naturally gifted, particularly in Sith sorcery, the ability to manipulate minds and create illusions. Where Bane was a hammer, direct and overwhelming, Zannah learned to be a scalpel, subtle and precise. Together, they represented different aspects of dark side power, and together they were far more dangerous than the sum of their parts. Their first major test came 10 years after Ruusan. A group of Jedi investigating reports of dark side activity tracked them to the planet Ambria. Bane, wearing his orbalisk armor by this point, faced 5 Jedi Masters while Zannah dealt with their Padawans. It was the first real combat either of them had experienced since forming their partnership, and it went badly. The Jedi were skilled, coordinated, powerful. They knew Bane had survived Ruusan, understood what he represented, and were determined to end the Sith threat permanently. During the battle, one of the dying Jedi Masters redirected Bane's own Force lightning back at him, and the electrical energy killed many of his orbalisks. The parasites released their toxins as they died, and Bane barely survived. Zannah saved him. Using her developing skills in Sith sorcery, she drove one of the surviving Jedi temporarily insane and hid both herself and her master until help arrived. When more Jedi showed up days later, they found only dead Jedi and no living Sith. They concluded that Bane had died from his wounds and that his apprentice had perished as well. This reinforced the galaxy's belief that the Sith were truly extinct. It bought Bane and Zannah decades to continue their work unobserved, to build networks of informants and resources, to position themselves, to influence galactic events from the shadows. As Bane aged, he became increasingly paranoid about death. The rule of two demanded that his apprentice eventually kill him, but he'd grown fond of existing and began seeking ways to extend his lure's life. His search led him to the tomb of Darth Zannah, an ancient Sith Lord who'd perfected the technique of essence transfer, the ability to move one's consciousness from an aging body to a younger one. This created tension with Zannah. She knew that according to the rule of two, she should challenge Bane and claim her place as master. But she also recognized that her master was testing her, seeing if she had the strength to strike. The two circled each other for years, each waiting for the other to make the first move, their relationship a complex dance of loyalty and inevitable betrayal. Finally, 30 years after taking Zannah as his apprentice, Bane forced the issue. He'd found Andedu's holocron and learned the essence transfer technique. He made it clear that he intended to take Zannah's body to continue living in a younger form while her consciousness was destroyed. This was a violation of the rule of two. But Bane had begun to think his philosophy might have flaws. Perhaps the master should continue forever, accumulating knowledge and power across centuries. Zannah, recognizing that her time had come, challenged him. Their duel was epic, taking place in the caves of Ambria where they'd fought the Jedi decades earlier. Master and apprentice, teacher and student, creator of a philosophy, and its first true test. They fought with every technique they knew, holding nothing back. Bane relied on his raw power and combat skill. Zannah used her sorcery, creating illusions that tormented her master, summoning dark side tendrils that seemed to tear at his very soul. The battle raged for hours. Both fighters pushed to their absolute limits, until finally Zannah found an opening and struck. Bane attempted the essence transfer in his final moments, trying to seize Zannah's body as his own died. But Zannah's will was too strong. She resisted, maintained her sense of self, and when the attempt failed, Bane's consciousness was torn apart and cast into the void, experiencing what might be described as a Sith hell, eternal awareness without the ability to affect reality, perfect powerlessness forever. Zannah stood over her master's corpse and felt the weight of her new title settle upon her. She was no longer an apprentice. She was Darth Zannah, Dark Lord of the Sith, heir to Bane's philosophy, and the second link in a chain that would stretch across 1,000 years. She took a new apprentice, continued the work Bane had started, and passed on the rule of two to the next generation. The cycle continued. Master trained apprentice. Apprentice grew strong. Apprentice killed master and claimed the title. Each generation stronger, each iteration of the Sith more refined, more patient, more dangerous. Across the centuries, the Sith lineage continued. Darth Zannah to Darth Cognis, Cognis to Millennial, Millennial to Vectivus, Vectivus to Plagueis, Plagueis to Sidious, each master teaching their apprentice the philosophy Bane had created, each ensuring that the Sith remained hidden while growing ever more powerful in the shadows. 900 years after Bane's death, during the Clone Wars, the Jedi Master Yoda traveled to the Sith homeworld of Korriban, seeking knowledge about immortality. In Bane's tomb, he encountered what seemed to be Bane's spirit, though whether it was truly the Dark Lord's consciousness or merely a manifestation of the dark side is unclear. The apparition of Darth Bane tried to tempt Yoda to darkness, but the ancient Jedi Master saw through the deception. "Not real you are," Yoda declared, and the spirit vanished. But the encounter reminded the Jedi that even in death, the Sith remained dangerous, their philosophy potent enough to corrupt across millennia. And 1,000 years after Ruusan, Darth Bane's vision finally came to fruition. Darth Sidious, the culmination of 1,000 years of plotting, manipulated the Clone Wars, destroyed the Jedi Order, and transformed the Republic into the Galactic Empire. The Sith had won. Not through direct military conquest, not through the kind of massive armies the Brotherhood of Darkness had fielded, but through patience, cunning, and the willingness to play a game measured in centuries. Sidious stood at the pinnacle of galactic power, the emperor of a regime built on the very philosophy Darth Bane had pioneered. One master, one apprentice, hidden in shadow, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The rule of two had proven its worth. The Sith had not just survived, they'd thrived, they'd evolved, they'd become stronger than any previous iteration. And it all traced back to a minor son from Apatros who'd refused to accept the limitations placed upon him, who'd rejected the deluded philosophy of the Brotherhood of Darkness, who'd reached back into ancient history to find a better way forward. Darth Bane never conquered the galaxy himself. He never ruled from a throne or commanded vast armies. His life was one of study, patience, and carefully laying foundations that others would build upon. But his impact on galactic history was greater than almost any other Sith Lord. Without Bane, the Sith would have remained extinct, a footnote in history books. With him, they became an unstoppable force that reshaped civilization itself. The Sith Army, the prophecy spoke of, was meant to be the perfect being who would lead the Sith to victory and make them stronger than ever. Many Dark Lords had claimed that title. Darth Bane was the only one who truly deserved it, not because he was the most powerful, though he was formidable, not because he conquered the most worlds, he conquered none, but because he understood what the Sith needed to survive and had the vision and will to implement it regardless of cost. His legacy lived on in every Sith Lord who followed, in every manipulation and scheme that brought the Order closer to ultimate victory, in the patience that allowed them to wait 1,000 years for the right moment. When Darth Sidious declared himself emperor, when the Jedi Order fell, when the Republic transformed into the Empire, it was Darth Bane's vision made manifest. And so we remember Darth Bane, not for glory or power in the traditional sense, not for the battles he won or the worlds he conquered, but for something far more profound, for seeing what needed to be done and having the courage to do it, for understanding that sometimes strength requires restraint. That power can be built through patience, that the long game can yield greater rewards than immediate gratification. From the mines of Apatros to the caves of Ruusan, from student to master, from heretic to founder of a new order, Darth Bane's journey transformed not just himself, but the nature of the Sith themselves. And in doing so, he became immortal, not through essence transfer or force spirits, but through the simple fact that every Sith who came after him walked the path he'd created. The rise of Darth Bane was the story of one man's refusal to accept the world as it was given to him. And in refusing to accept it, he changed it forever. If you enjoyed learning about the rise of Darth Bane and the transformation of the Sith Order, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Sith Lore for more deep dives into the dark side of the Star Wars universe. May the Force serve you well, and remember, the Sith are always patient, always watching, always waiting for their moment. Until next time.